I once believed that no one on this earth could ever betray me until the day my own children forged my signature and sent strangers to throw me out of the home I'd built my whole life. The moment I uncovered the truth, my trust was shattered, and so began a revenge you would never expect. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch our next gripping episodes. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the old house on Willow Lane, painting gold stripes across the polished oak floors. Elisa Nguyen moved quietly through her home, her movements slow but steady, her breath the only sound in the hush of the empty hallway. This was the house her late husband Michael had poured his dreams into stone and wood, a place built for family laughter and roots. Even now, years after Michael's passing, she could sense his presence in every corner, in the worn grooves of the staircase, in the way the kitchen still held the faintest scent of his favorite black coffee, in the silent weight of morning light across the mantel. She paused at the sideboard and straightened a photo in its silver frame. Michael grinned back at her from the picture arm slung around her shoulders on a bright summer day. Both of them younger, carefree, unaware of how precious such moments would one day become. Elisa traced the edge of the frame with a trembling finger, her thoughts adrift in memory. She moved into the garden, sliding open the old French doors, and let the crisp air fill her lungs. The secret garden had always been her sanctuary. Wild roses tangled along the iron fence, and a giant apple tree one she and Michael had planted the first spring they owned. The house stood sentinel over the flower beds. Here the world felt safe, untouched by the slow drift of people and time. Here Michael had knelt in the grass, pulling weeds beside her, humming old Motown songs as he worked. Here they had watched their son Ethan play with the neighbor kids, shrieking with laughter, skins sticky with popsicle juice. For a moment Elisa closed her eyes and listened not just for the wind, but for echoes. Laughter. The thud of Ethan's feet as he tore across the lawn. The high, sweet voice of little Mia, her granddaughter, calling for one more bedtime story. All of it felt both achingly close and impossibly far away. She bent to prune the peonies, her hands working with practiced care. She spoke softly to the garden out of habit, more than hope, murmuring to the roots in the sky. "Are you watching, Michael? Do you see how the roses are coming in this year?" There was no answer except the distant trill of a sparrow and the soft hum of traffic beyond the hedges. She smiled faintly, tucking a stray lock of white hair behind her ear, and wiped her hands on her apron. Retirement, when it came, arrived like an unwelcome guest. For 37 years she had been Mrs. Nguyen, 5th grade teacher at Willow Lane Community School. The children had called her Mrs. N, and in their chaos and curiosity, she had found her purpose. She still remembered their faces, their questions, their gratitude, tucked in notes and drawings she kept in a shoebox in her closet. Now the children were grown, her colleagues scattered or gone, and the classroom silent. Some days she missed the noise so much her chest ached. She glanced at the kitchen clock, 8:42 a.m. It was Saturday, the day Ethan, his wife Linda, and their daughter Mia were supposed to visit. Elisa's heart fluttered with a familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. She had planned the visit for weeks, dusting shopping, folding linens, baking the cinnamon coffee cake Ethan loved as a boy. She set the table for 4, arranging blue and white china plates, polishing the old silverware Michael's mother had given them as a wedding gift. In the dining room, sunlight washed over the family photos lining the mantel. A wedding portrait, Michael in his navy suit, Elisa in pale pink, her face alight with hope. Another years later, with a toddler Ethan in her lap, eyes wide with wonder. More recent pictures, too. Ethan's law school graduation. Mia as a gap-toothed kindergartner, last Thanksgiving's group shot where Linda's hand rested lightly, almost reluctantly, on Elisa's shoulder. She tried to ignore the way that gap had widened in recent years, the way smiles in photos seemed practiced, the way her son's voice on the phone had grown distant, careful. She shook off the thought, instead choosing to focus on the present. Today was for family. Today she promised herself would be different. She checked the guest room one more time. Clean sheets, a vase of fresh-cut lilacs on the nightstand, Mia's favorite book tucked under the pillow. She paused by the window looking out over the yard. In the secret garden, sunbeams danced across the dewy grass. She remembered Michael's voice. "Someday when the kids are grown, and it's just you and me, we'll sit out here every morning drinking coffee and reading the paper." That day had never come. Michael was gone and Elisa sat alone on the porch, coffee cooling in her hand. Still she hoped. The sound of the old grandfather clock striking 10 startled her. She straightened, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror face, lined eyes gentle but shadowed. She smoothed her blouse dabbed on a bit of rose water and tucked away her worry with the same practiced grace she'd used all her life. From the kitchen she watched the driveway every so often, parting the curtains to see if Ethan's car had turned onto Willow Lane. The world outside felt both familiar and strange. So much had changed, yet so much had not. A child zipped by on a scooter, and for an instant Elisa's heart jumped, but it wasn't Mia, just the neighbor's son. She smiled a little wistful. She filled the bird feeder's scattered seed along the walk and swept the porch steps. Each act was a ritual of hope. She made a mental list, check the guest towels, warm the coffee cake, find the good napkins, set out the lemon curd. Each task was an anchor, a way to keep the loneliness at bay. In the quiet, she found herself wandering through memories. Michael reading the Sunday paper, glasses sliding down his nose. Ethan at 6 building a fort out of couch cushions and pleading for one more hour before bed. Linda, new to the family, watching it all with wary eyes, always just outside the circle. Mia as a toddler, sticky with jam, tumbling into Elisa's lap with reckless affection. Those were the days she clung to now as the house grew quieter with every passing year. She returned to the garden, trailing her fingers over the lavender, inhaling its sharp, clean scent. She knelt by the rose bush, pruning away a dead branch. "You have to let go of what's gone," Michael had told her once, "so the new blooms have room to grow." She wondered, not for the first time, if that was still possible. Back inside, Elisa checked the time again, 11:23. Still no sign of Ethan's car. Her nerves fluttered, a flock of uneasy birds. She arranged the cinnamon coffee cake on her mother's platter, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Across the street, the maple trees tossed in the breeze, leaves flashing silver in the sunlight. She reached for the phone, tempted to call to ask if they were running late. But something stopped her, pride perhaps, or the fear of seeming needy. She set the phone down, sipped her tea, and watched the empty street. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock and the distant caw of a crow. Elisa closed her eyes, remembering the rush of children's laughter, the thump of Michael's boots at the door, the scent of cinnamon and cut grass. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the ache of longing, and told herself that today would be different. Today, she would have her family, even if only for a few precious hours. And so she waited alone in her beautiful, lonely house, heart full of hope and fear, surrounded by the ghosts of love and the unspoken wish that this time they might truly come home. Ethan's silver sedan finally appeared at the end of Willow Lane just after noon, its headlights flickering in and out between the old maples, as if unsure it truly belonged there. Elisa caught herself smoothing the front of her blouse and brushing invisible crumbs from the kitchen counter, heart beating with the anxious, involuntary hope of every mother waiting for her grown child. The engine cut, and for a moment there was only the hush of bird song, then the sound of car doors slamming 1, 2, 3 in quick succession. Ethan's voice came first, drifting through the open window. "Hey, Mom." He called, his tone friendly but distracted, his gaze fixed on his phone as he crossed the walk. His hair was neater than she remembered, face a touch thinner, and he wore the tired look of a man carrying deadlines in his pocket. Linda, all crisp lines and carefully pressed linen, followed behind him, her lips curving into a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Little Mia trailed last lost somewhere between child and teenager, her headphones clamped on shoulders, hunched under the weight of a too-heavy backpack. Elisa stepped out onto the porch, willing herself to believe this would be different, that this time warmth would flow back into the old channels, that they would laugh, that the afternoon would stretch with the easy intimacy of family. "Hi, Mom. You look great," Ethan said, pausing for a brisk hug that already leaned toward letting go. He sniffed the air, nodding toward the kitchen. "Is that your coffee cake?" "Been a while." Linda kissed Elisa's cheek, barely brushing skin, her perfume a faint cloud of lilies in distance. "Hi, Elisa. The garden looks really nice." Mia's high grandma was muffled, her eyes glued to a phone screen, thumbs tapping an endless message to someone far more interesting. Elisa forced a smile, heart squeezing. Come in. I just made tea." She stepped aside, watching the small procession pass her son, her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter, each carrying their own silence. Inside the old house felt suddenly smaller. The air weighted with all the words they wouldn't say. The kitchen, always the heart of her world, felt foreign as they filed in and arranged themselves like guests at a hotel breakfast. "Let me take your bags," Elisa offered. "No, it's fine, Mom. We'll just leave them here," Ethan replied, already glancing at his phone. Linda sat at the counter, crossing her legs and scrolling through her emails, her eyes flitting to the clock above the stove. "We had to reroute. There was a wreck on the interstate." "Mia, honey, take your headphones off." Mia shrugged, not moving. "It's fine. I'm just listening to music." Ethan looked at his daughter with an expression halfway between annoyance and resignation, then turned to his mother. "So, Mom, everything okay around here? No more trouble with the gutters?" Elisa hesitated. "Oh, everything's all right. I had Mr. Miller next door help me last week." Linda brightened a fraction. "That's good. These old houses, there's so much work. Have you thought any more about moving? There's a new condo complex going up downtown." Ethan showed me pictures. So much easier, everything on one floor. Elisa's smile didn't falter, but inside she felt something cold slip down her spine. "I'm not ready to give up my garden just yet." "Of course," Linda said quickly, looking away. Tea was poured, coffee cake sliced, but conversation never quite got off the ground. Ethan scrolled through his phone between bites, fielding calls from his office. Linda discussed Mia's new after-school programs, robotics, debate, ballet, but each mention sounded like a scheduled obligation, not a story. Mia retreated behind her headphones, nodding or grunting if anyone tried to speak to her. Elisa tried again and again to bridge the growing distance. "I found your old soccer ball in the shed, Mia. Want to kick it around later?" Mia shrugged, never looking up. "Maybe. I have homework." Linda glanced up. "She's in advanced classes now, lots of pressure, not much time for playing." The air grew staler with every minute, each attempt at connection fading quickly, replaced by awkward silence or the soft clicking of Linda's nails on her phone. Ethan excused himself after half an hour, stepping out on the porch for another quick call. Linda took a video call at the kitchen table, her voice soft and clipped, switching seamlessly from English to Vietnamese and back. Elisa gathered plates, refilled the teapot, and searched their faces for any hint of real feeling, concern, affection, even annoyance, but found only the blank, polite detachment of people waiting out an obligation. Later, as the afternoon waned and sunlight faded from the hallway, Ethan and Linda retreated to the guest room to catch up on some things. Mia stayed in the living room, feet up on the old coffee table, lost in her screen. Elisa wandered through the house, her hands fluttering uselessly over doorknobs, pillows, the backs of chairs. She tried to busy herself in the garden, but even there her son's voice drifted through the window, low and urgent. "I don't know, Linda, she's just so stubborn." "No, I haven't asked yet. We can't push too hard, not today." Elisa froze, pruning shears suspended in midair. She couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable, a sharp edge beneath the calm. She heard Linda's reply, softer, but unmistakably impatient. "You said this would be simple. The realtor needs an answer by Monday. I can't keep stalling Ethan." Ethan's answer was a sigh. I know, just let me handle it." Elisa's hands trembled. She set down the shears, moving closer to the window, barely breathing. "It's her home," Ethan whispered. It'll break her heart." Linda's voice sharpened words slicing through the glass. "You said she was ready. You said she understood. We need her signature. You know what's at stake." Elisa's knees went weak. She pressed a hand to her chest and forced herself to back away from the window, her mind swirling. The pieced together fragments formed a picture she wished she could unsee. A picture of her family, not as beloved companions, but as people with plans, timetables, and something to gain. As dusk crept across the garden, Elisa moved inside, closing doors quietly. The old house growing colder, larger, emptier. She watched her son and daughter-in-law in the kitchen, saw the way their eyes slid away from hers, how their touches were hurried, how the talk always circled back to practicalities, mortgages, maintenance, next steps. Not memories, not love. That night, after they'd all disappeared to their rooms, Elisa lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was utterly silent. No laughter. No soft voices drifting down the hallway, just the distant hum of Linda's voice on the phone and the sharp staccato rhythm of Ethan pacing in the guest room. Unable to sleep, Elisa rose and padded softly down the hall, her steps careful, heart pounding. Outside the guest room door, she heard them speaking voices, low, urgent, conspiratorial. "Get her to sign first thing in the morning. Tell her it's for taxes, she'll believe you." "She's not stupid, Linda." "Then make it sound simple. You said you'd handle it." Elisa backed away, her mind swirling, her breath coming in shallow, frightened bursts. She returned to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring into the dark. Suddenly, the familiar house around her felt like enemy territory. She felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, love giving way to calculation, comfort, turning to suspicion. For the first time in her life, Elisa wondered if her family's love had an expiration date, and if she was already living past it. She sat in the darkness for a long time, hands knotted tightly in her lap, listening to the night sounds of a house that no longer felt like home. The night passed in fragments. Elisa drifted in and out of shallow sleep, her mind spinning body tense beneath the soft quilt Michael's mother had made decades ago. She counted the cracks on the ceiling, counted her breaths, counted the things she'd lost and feared to lose. Down the hallway, faint murmurs rose and fell, a muted, uneasy soundtrack to her unrest. It was as if the old house itself was holding its breath, waiting for some terrible truth to surface. At dawn, Elisa dressed in silence and slipped downstairs, her heart heavy and uncertain. She moved through the kitchen, setting the kettle on the stove, her hands moving automatically. The world outside was still, the garden silvered with dew. The only sounds were the kettle's slow hiss and her own pulse pounding in her ears. She noticed the folder on the kitchen counter, almost by accident, a nondescript manila envelope nearly hidden beneath a pile of junk mail and grocery ads. She had seen Ethan sorting papers last night, but she hadn't thought much of it. Now her name caught her eye, Elisa Nguyen printed in block letters on a cover sheet. Underneath, in smaller type, property transfer documents. She hesitated. For a moment she told herself it was a mistake, some harmless insurance update, maybe a warranty for the furnace, a bank statement. But dread pooled in her stomach as she drew the envelope close, her fingers trembling as she slid the contents out onto the kitchen table. There they were, page after page of crisp legal documents, real estate transfer agreements, affidavits, notary stamps, lines and lines of careful legalese. She recognized her own address, Willow Lane, written in tidy block print. She recognized the parcel number from the annual tax bill. Her breath caught as she flipped to the final pages. There, in blue ballpoint, sat her signature. Elisa Nguyen. Her name every loop and stroke, but wrong, ever so slightly wrong. The N in Nguyen slanted just a little too steep, the S a hair too small, the I dotted like an afterthought. But it was her name, her hand at least, that's what any stranger would see. Only Elisa could feel the falseness of it in her bones. The room seemed to tilt. She pressed a fist to her mouth, fighting the sudden urge to vomit. Her son had forged her name, her own child. The air felt thin, her chest tight, sweat prickling at her scalp. She remembered teaching Ethan to write his name at the kitchen table, guiding his tiny fingers, whispering encouragement, tracing each letter with patient love. And now those same fingers had betrayed her. It was a violation so intimate she could hardly bear it. Her vision blurred with tears, but she forced herself to read. The document laid it out in brutal clarity. She, Elisa Nguyen, hereby voluntarily and knowingly transfers full title and all rights to the property at 48 Willow Lane to Ethan Nguyen and Linda Nguyen to be executed and filed with the county registrar, effective immediately. The language was absolute. There was no mention of life estate, no clause about her right to remain, nothing left to interpretation. It was a clean break. And there again was her forged signature pressed with conviction onto the page. Her mind reeled, desperate for a lifeline. Was it possible she had signed something by mistake? Had Ethan tricked her? Slid these forms in among the utility bills, the tax statements, the endless stream of adult paperwork that always demanded signatures. She ransacked her memory, clutching at stray details. Had he come to her in the kitchen, asked for her help with some routine document? Had she signed out of habit, out of trust? Or was it a lie from start to finish? Did her own child really believe she would never notice? She pushed away from the table, the room spinning. Panic clawed at her chest as she rushed upstairs, every footfall echoing in her ears. She opened the drawer of her bedside table, pulling out her folder of important documents, the will she and Michael had updated after his cancer diagnosis. The deed, the power of attorney forms, birth certificates, marriage license. She spread them on the bed, rifling through page after page, searching for tampering, for any other sign of intrusion. The will was untouched as far as she could see. The deed, however, was gone. The crisp blue folder that had always sat behind her passport missing. She dropped to her knees, yanking open every drawer, every box, searching in growing desperation. Had she misplaced it? Had someone, Ethan Linda, taken it from her room? Her hands shook as she pawed through the closet, the safe, even her jewelry box. Nothing. The sense of violation grew larger, sharper, until it filled the whole room, then the house. Elisa felt stripped bare, exposed. It was as if every secret, every memory she had ever cherished here was now in danger. She staggered back to the bed, hands fisting in the quilt, and sobbed soundless, racking sobs that shook her shoulders, tears soaking into the fabric. The grief was not just for the house or even for Michael, but for the child she thought she knew, for the love she thought was unbreakable, for trust wasted and gone. For a long time she wept, her body curled tight as a question mark. She let the pain flood through her, not fighting it, letting it hollow her out. When the sobs finally ebbed, Elisa forced herself to sit up, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. She stared at the papers on the bed, the signature that was hers and not hers, the legalese that threatened to erase her whole life. The helplessness was suffocating. She had no one to call. Her friends were gone, Michael dead, her siblings scattered. She was alone in a war she had never imagined. Downstairs she heard footsteps, the sound of Ethan's laughter. She tensed, heart hammering. Every noise became suspect, every word a possible lie. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to appear to ask what she was doing, to catch her in the act of discovering his betrayal. She pressed a hand to her chest, willed herself to breathe. She would not confront him, not yet. She needed time. She needed to think. Back in the kitchen, she moved quietly, tucking the forged documents into her purse, locking it in her car for safekeeping. She could not trust anyone, not even herself, not after so many years of believing in family. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands barely steady enough to hold it. She sat at the table, staring at the garden. The world outside seemed so unchanged, sunlight dappling the roses, a sparrow flitting to the bird feeder, the distant whir of a lawnmower. It felt obscene, this normalcy, this illusion of safety. The house was no longer her haven. It was enemy ground. She watched Ethan and Linda out the window as they talked on their phones, voices blending with the song of cicadas. She felt invisible, erased. Her loneliness sharpened into something else, anger perhaps, or a stubborn flicker of defiance. She was not dead yet. She was not helpless. She would not surrender this house, this history, without a fight. For the rest of the day, she moved through the rooms as if seeing them for the last time. The staircase Michael had built with his own hands, the scuffed floor where Ethan had taken his first steps, the faded wallpaper she and her husband had chosen together, believing in a future that would always belong to them. She touched every object, every photograph, committing them to memory. That night, alone in her room, Elisa stared at the ceiling and whispered Michael's name. "Help me. Give me strength. Don't let them erase me." She did not know what she would do, only that she would do something. She would not go quietly. She would not let her story end in betrayal. The pain was still there, raw, unforgiving, but beneath it something new took root. A fierce, unwavering will. Elisa Nguyen would not disappear. Not for her son, not for anyone. Outside, the night pressed close, silent and watchful. But in the darkness, Elisa's resolve began to grow steady and bright, a light that this time would not be extinguished. The next morning dawned brittle and cloudless, as if the world itself had conspired to keep Elisa from hiding in shadow. She didn't sleep much. She'd lain awake, replaying every conversation with Ethan and Linda, every warm memory warped now by the knowledge of betrayal. But with the dawn came something else, resolve sharper than grief, clearer than fear. She brewed coffee in silence and took her mug to the garden, the crisp air scraping against her skin. In the faint glow of sunrise, the secret garden looked unchanged. Damp earth, tangled roses, dew clinging to each blade of grass. Yet everything was different. The house behind her felt hostile, every wall echoing with the secret she carried. She needed help, not comfort, not sympathy, real tangible help. Her first call was to Rachel Lane. Rachel was young for an attorney, sharp, direct, with a kind of dogged confidence Elisa had always admired. She'd handled the paperwork when Michael passed, guiding Elisa through the snarl of probate and estate law with patience that never felt patronizing. Rachel's office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian just off Main Street. Elisa dialed the number, her hands only slightly trembling. The receptionist answered, her voice brisk and efficient. "Lane and Harper Law. How can I help you?" "This is Elisa Nguyen. I need to speak to Rachel Lane. It's urgent." "Of course, Miss Nguyen. Please hold." Elisa paced the kitchen as she waited, her mind darting through worst-case scenarios. Would Rachel think she was losing her mind? Would she take her seriously or dismiss her concerns as the paranoia of an old woman? The line clicked. Elisa Rachel's voice was warm but alert, picking up on the strain. "What's happened?" Elisa explained, halting at first, then with increasing urgency. She told Rachel about the documents, the forged signature, the missing deed. She left nothing out, her suspicions about Ethan and Linda, the late-night conversations, the feeling of being erased in her own home. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Elisa waited, clutching the phone, willing Rachel to believe her. "Elisa," Rachel said at last, "you're not crazy. This is serious. If what you're saying is true, it's fraud. Maybe even elder abuse, depending on what they're trying to do. Do you have the documents with you?" "Yes, I've hidden them in my car. I was afraid they might disappear." "That was smart. Here's what I want you to do." Rachel's voice shifted into her professional cadence, calm and sure. "Don't confront them yet. Don't let them know you know. Keep everything exactly as it is. If they ask you to sign anything, say you want to review it with your attorney first. Gather anything you can, emails, text messages, even scraps of notes. We need proof." Elisa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'll do it. I'll start today." "Good. And Elisa, you're not alone. I'm with you. I'll call you tomorrow to set up a time for you to bring in the documents." After the call ended, Elisa felt steadier. She was still scared, terrified if she was honest, but fear was a tool now, not a cage. She dressed, tucking her phone into her cardigan pocket, and headed outside. The neighborhood was just beginning to stir, a jogger passing with a nod. The mailman working his way up the block. The old Miller house across the street still shuddered against the morning. Elisa made her way along the hedge, breathing in the cold metallic scent of dawn. She found Mr. Thomas Miller in his front yard, untangling a garden hose with deliberate care. He'd lived on Willow Lane longer than anyone, a widower with a reputation for minding his own business, always polite but rarely chatty. Still, Elisa had always sensed a quiet strength in him, the way he scanned the street when a stranger's car lingered, the way he noticed every change on the block. "Morning, Thomas," Elisa called, forcing a smile. "Morning, Elisa." He straightened, wiped his hands on his jeans. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, then blurted, "Can I talk to you privately?" He studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp and steady. "Of course. Let's sit out back." They settled on the faded wooden bench behind his garage, shielded from the street. Elisa told him everything, her words tumbling out about Ethan and Linda, the missing deed, the forged signature, the calls to Rachel. She spoke quickly, afraid she'd lose her nerve if she paused. Thomas listened, silent but attentive, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "You're not wrong to worry, Elisa. I've seen things like this before. Too many times." He glanced away, jaw tight. "I was a cop before I retired. Homicide mostly, but you learn how people operate when there's money on the line." For a moment, Elisa just stared. "I didn't know." He shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered. But now, maybe it does." A weight lifted from Elisa's chest. "Thomas, I need your help. I don't know what to do." He nodded. "First thing, document everything. Dates, times, what you overhear. Don't trust anyone except your lawyer. Don't leave your documents here. Keep them with you or in a safe place. And, if you're willing, let me help you keep an eye on things. People talk to me. I hear things." She nodded, relief almost making her dizzy. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, she didn't feel entirely alone. Together they walked back to her porch. Thomas offered to take a look around the house for signs of forced entry just in case. Elisa watched as he checked windows and doors, moving with the quiet assurance of a man used to reading spaces for danger. Satisfied, he returned to the porch. "I'll keep watch. If you see anything strange, strangers around, cars parked too long, let me know. And Elisa, don't let them bully you, not for a second." So, as the morning stretched into afternoon, Elisa set about her new task. She gathered every scrap of evidence she could find, old emails from Ethan about routine paperwork, text messages from Linda asking about important documents, even the calendar reminders Linda had set on her phone for meeting with the bank. She snapped photos of everything, saved them to a flash drive she hid inside a box of tea in her pantry. She started a notebook, writing down every conversation she overheard, every offhand comment. The day felt electric, every sound sharper, every glance more meaningful. She moved quietly through the house, alert to the smallest shift. In the evening, she called Rachel, giving her an update and promising to bring the documents the next day. Rachel advised her to remain calm, to say nothing if confronted, and to keep the originals with her at all times. Later that night, Elisa and Thomas sat on her porch, lights low, sharing stories over mugs of tea. He told her about his years as a detective, the cases that had kept him awake at night. He spoke in a low voice, careful but not patronizing, weaving advice into his stories: how to read a room, how to keep people talking, how to hide strength behind a calm smile. "We'll get through this," he promised, clinking his mug against hers. One step at a time. Elisa managed a tired smile, the weight on her shoulders just a little lighter. For the first time in days, she felt the beginnings of hope. By the time she went to bed, she'd started to think of herself, Rachel and Thomas, as a team, a small investigation unit against the world. They had no badge, no warrant, only their wits and their willingness to stand together. But that, she realized, was more than she'd had yesterday. And as she drifted to sleep, clutching her notebook, Elisa whispered a promise into the darkness. "I will not let them take everything I've built, not without a fight." Outside, the garden stood silent. the first stars kindling overhead, a quiet witness to the start of a battle. Elisa never wanted but would fight with everything she had. Elisa learned to listen for footsteps in the hallway. They gave her precious seconds to hide her phone, shut her notebook, or simply brace herself. Now, with Rachel and Thomas on her side, she moved differently through her own home, watchful, calculating the soft armor of her years, replaced with the steel of quiet resistance. The games began at breakfast. Ethan arrived first. His tie loosened his voice, a calculated blend of concern and forced cheer. Linda soon followed, her lips stretched in a smile that never touched her eyes. Mia trailed behind, already looking bored, headphones clamped over her ears, as if to protect herself from the rising tension in the house. Ethan poured himself coffee, then glanced at Elisa, his tone gentle but edged. "Mom, I brought some forms for you to look at. Just routine, bank stuff, making sure everything's up to date." He laid a neat stack of papers on the table, sliding them toward her with a practiced casualness. "If you could just sign where I marked, it's just for the records." Elisa picked up the pen, her hand steady, her expression mild. "Let me have a look, dear." She squinted at the page, holding it closer, lips pursed. "My eyes aren't what they used to be, you know." "What's this about again?" Linda jumped in the edge, and her voice smoothed by faux patience. "It's just an update for the mortgage, Elisa. They need everyone's signature. It's nothing complicated. Ethan already took care of most of it." Elisa set the pen down and reached for her reading glasses, buying time. She let her hands tremble just a bit, leaned closer, and traced a line with her finger. "This is so much paperwork these days. I can't keep up. Maybe I'll take it to Mr. Miller next door. He helps me with things sometimes." Ethan's face hardened just for a second. "Mom, you don't need to bother the neighbors. This is just family business." Elisa looked up, her eyes wide with practiced confusion. "Oh, I'm sure you're right, Ethan. But you know how I get mixed up. I'd hate to do something wrong." Linda's jaw tightened. "It's really simple, Elisa. I can explain it if you'd like." Elisa smiled sweetly, stalling. "I'll think about it. I'd just like to have Rachel take a look. She helped me after Michael passed. You remember her, don't you?" Linda's voice dropped cold now. "Rachel is busy, I'm sure. This is just a formality. I'll call her anyway," Elisa replied, folding the papers and slipping them into her cardigan pocket. "No harm in being careful, right?" Ethan's hand tightened around his coffee mug. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence rang thick and electric until Mia, oblivious, asked, "Can we get pancakes instead? I don't like oatmeal." Elisa forced a smile. "Of course, honey. I'll make you some." But the air didn't clear. It grew heavier as the morning went on. Every time Ethan or Linda tried to catch Elisa alone, she feigned confusion, wandered off mid-sentence, or insisted she needed to check the laundry or water the roses. More than once, she let them see her fumble with her phone, pretending to puzzle over the screen, while in reality she hit record, catching every word of their coaxing and threats. She photographed every piece of paper they handed her, sometimes pretending to be impressed by a photo of Mia, other times asking, "Wouldn't it be nice to have a record, just in case each document, each signature line she captured?" Rachel had taught her how to upload everything to a hidden drive in the cloud. Thomas, meanwhile, texted her reminders from next door. Keep calm, stall, never alone. That afternoon the storm broke. Ethan found her in the garden pruning roses. His smile was brittle. "Mom, can we talk alone?" She glanced at the open window. She'd made sure Linda was within earshot, just as Rachel had advised. "Of course, dear." He lowered his voice. "Why are you making this difficult? I've handled everything just like Dad would have wanted. We're your family, Mom. We're just trying to take care of you." Elisa didn't flinch. She brushed a stray hair from her forehead, eyes sad but clear. "Taking care of me means honesty, Ethan. You know that. I just want to be sure." Linda appeared on the porch, arms crossed. "Is there a problem?" Elisa's straightened voice, trembling but firm. "Not at all, Linda. Ethan was just telling me how much you two want to help. I said I'd like Rachel to look at those papers. I don't sign anything until she's read it." Linda's voice sharpened. "We can't wait, Elisa. The bank's deadline is tomorrow." Elisa feigned worry, letting her lower lip tremble. "Oh dear, that sounds important." Maybe I should call them myself. Ethan stepped forward, voice low and urgent. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Elisa folded her hands. I won't be rushed, Ethan. Not with my home. Linda turned away, muttering under her breath. Ethan's face closed, all warmth gone. You always have to be difficult. You can't even trust your own son. Mia, drawn by the raised voices, poked her head out the back door. What's going on? For a moment, everyone froze. Mia's eyes darted from her father's clenched jaw to her grandmother's quivering hands. Nothing, sweetheart, Linda called, voice too bright. Go back inside. But Mia didn't move. Why are you yelling at Grandma? Ethan forced a smile, crouching to her level. We're just talking honey. Grown-up stuff. Mia didn't buy it. You're making her cry. Elisa blinked in surprise. She hadn't realized tears had spilled down her cheeks. Not all of them were for show. She wiped them away, turning to her granddaughter. It's okay, Mia. Sometimes families have disagreements. But something had shifted. Mia looked at her parents with new suspicion, stepping closer to Elisa, as if taking sides. Linda shot a glance at Ethan, frustration written in every line of her face. The standoff broke when Mia asked quietly, Are you going to make Grandma move away? Linda softened her tone, kneeling beside her daughter. Of course not, honey. We just want what's best for Grandma. We're trying to help. Ethan nodded, but his eyes were cold. Go inside, Mia. We'll be there in a minute. Mia lingered, eyes wide and frightened, before backing away, disappearing into the house. The silence that followed was different, a gulf, not a pause. Ethan straightened, his tone hardening. You're making this worse, Mom. Think about what you're doing. Elisa's voice was quiet but unyielding. I am thinking, Ethan. For the first time in a long while. Linda turned away, shaking her head. Unbelievable. As they retreated, Elisa felt the ache in her chest, not just the sharp grief of betrayal, but something heavier. Older, the slow fracture running through her family, stretching now to the next generation. She wondered if Mia, that bright, awkward girl, would remember this moment as the day her family came undone. Back inside, Elisa locked herself in her bedroom, her hands shaking as she transferred audio files and photographs to Rachel's shared drive. She stared at her reflection, searching for the teacher, the mother, the wife she'd been. She saw someone older, lonelier, but not yet broken. In the hallway, she heard Ethan's voice, low and desperate. If she doesn't sign, we're screwed. Linda replied, words muffled but sharp. We push harder, she'll crack. But Elisa was done cracking. She was learning with every moment how to bend without breaking. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, Elisa crept into Mia's room, kissed her granddaughter's sleeping forehead, and whispered a silent promise. I won't let them take everything. I won't let them teach you to betray. Outside, thunder rumbled on the horizon. The air was heavy with the promise of rain and of reckoning yet to come. Night had fallen heavy, pressing against the windows with a humid persistence. In the hush after Ethan and Linda's latest argument, Elisa wandered the darkened house, unable to sleep, every lamp casting her shadow long and strange on the walls. Her thoughts spiraled, memory and fear, tangling so tightly she could barely breathe. In her restlessness, Elisa returned to the garden. Her garden, Michael's garden, the only place that still felt like sanctuary. The air was damp, laced with the perfume of late-blooming roses and the distant metallic tang of rain. She followed the brick path past the tangled hydrangeas and the overgrown patch where she and Michael had once planned to build a gazebo. The old apple tree stood sentinel at the far edge, its trunk gnarled and wise branches twisting up toward a pale moon. She crouched beneath its boughs, pressing her palms to the cool earth. All her life this patch of land had been her anchor, the place she ran as a child, the place she taught Ethan to plant his first seedling, the place she buried Michael's letters after the funeral, unable to bear their company but unwilling to destroy them. Her mind wandered back to a late autumn years ago, when Michael, pale and coughing but still himself, had asked her to help him repair a loose stone in the garden wall. She remembered how he'd limped across the lawn, refusing her help, his breath clouding in the cold, his eyes brighter than usual. He'd chosen a stone near the old compost heap at the corner of the garden, no one but Michael ever bothered with. Every garden holds secrets, he'd told her, kneeling painfully as he lifted the stone and pushed something into the damp soil. Someday you'll need to know where to look. At the time, she'd thought it was just another of his romantic gestures, a message in a bottle, a memory sealed away for future discovery. But now, with her home and legacy at stake, the memory glowed in her mind like a lantern in the dark. Driven by instinct and desperation, Elisa fetched a flashlight and garden trowel from the shed. She moved silently, wary of waking anyone inside. Rain began to fall soft at first, then harder, drumming against the leaves and her shoulders as she knelt at the compost heap, heart thudding in her chest. She swept her hands over the stones, feeling for any that felt loose or out of place. Her fingers paused at one slightly sunken, worn smooth by decades of weather. She dug carefully, heart pounding in her ears, until the stone shifted beneath her hands. With a grunt, she pulled it free, exposing a narrow hollow beneath. Her light caught the edge of a battered tin box, nearly swallowed by earth and roots. It was heavier than she expected, and when she shook it, something inside shifted, papers perhaps, or something more precious. With trembling hands, Elisa carried the box to the old bench beneath the apple tree. She brushed away dirt and rain, pried open the lid. Inside, a treasure trove, a stack of envelopes tied in blue ribbon, yellowed notebooks thick with Michael's neat handwriting, black and white photographs of a life they'd built together, smiling at a wedding, holding baby Ethan, standing beneath this very tree in the prime of summer. Her hands shook as she thumbed through the letters. Michael's voice captured on the page wrapped around her like a blanket. Declarations of love from the war years. Jokes and fears shared in the middle of sleepless nights, confessions from the hard seasons of their marriage. Each word was an echo of the man she'd lost, and the man she now realized had seen so much farther than she ever guessed. Beneath the letters, Elisa found a thick legal envelope. It was sealed with wax, Michael's old university ring pressed into the soft red, a habit he'd loved for its old-world formality. With the gentleness of ritual, she broke the seal and pulled out a sheaf of legal documents, the original will and testament Michael had drafted in the last weeks of his life. Elisa blinked away rain and tears, reading by flashlight. Michael's voice rang out in the words he'd chosen, every sentence careful and precise. To my beloved wife, Elisa Nguyen, the Willow Lane estate, and all property therein shall pass not to my descendants as a matter of blood, but to the one who keeps the garden alive. It is my wish, my last and highest, that this land belong to its caretaker, the one who tends its soil and preserves its spirit, for as long as she draws breath. Below, Michael's signature, strong, unforgeable, the date days before his final trip to the hospital. There, too, was a notarized codicil should any transfer of the estate be attempted against this wish. The inheritance would revert upon proof to the rightful caretaker, with all previous sales or transfers rendered null. Elisa gasped, clutching the document to her chest. Michael, brilliant, stubborn, fiercely loyal, had seen through every possible betrayal, even the one she never dared name. In the face of death, he'd left her not just the garden, but the power to fight for it. Her tears fell hot, and unfiltered relief and rage and love mingling until she was shaking. She read the will again, then again, her eyes drinking in every line. The words rooted deep inside her, not to my descendants, but to the one who keeps the garden alive. Michael had always known her heart. He had understood that love meant not just blood, but the everyday acts of care, the pruning, the planting, the silent watching over what could so easily die. Thunder cracked closer now, shaking the sky above the garden. Elisa tucked the documents inside her jacket, her clothes-soaked hands muddy and numb. But inside, something blazed hope, sharper than the pain, stronger than the fear. She lingered on the bench, reading the old letters until the rain slowed. She found a photograph she'd never seen before, Michael in the garden, holding her hand, their eyes meeting the camera with a look that belonged to another lifetime. On the back in his scrawl, "For the one who keeps the garden, my heart is yours always." Elisa pressed the photograph to her lips. "Thank you, Michael," she whispered into the night, her voice breaking. "You knew. You always knew." She closed the tin, her resolve as solid as the roots beneath her. Tonight, for the first time in weeks, she was not afraid. She was armed with love, with memory, with the truth that could save everything. When she returned to the house, she left muddy footprints across the kitchen tile, not caring. She washed her hands in the sink, breathing deep, feeling a sense of belonging return with every exhale. Upstairs, Ethan and Linda were arguing behind closed doors about banks, about delays, about the stubbornness of old women. Elisa smiled, just a little, a warrior's smile. She had found the key, she had found her fate, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she could see a way out lit by Michael's love and the promise that she would never, ever be erased. The rain had barely let up by the time Elisa, clutching Michael's original will and the dusty tin box to her chest, made her way to her car at first light. The clouds still pressed low and bruised over Willow Lane, the garden soaked and shimmering, but inside, Elisa burned with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She'd barely slept, replaying every line of Michael's testament in her mind, heart slamming in her chest, but the exhaustion didn't slow her. Today there would be no hiding. Rachel Lane met her at the law office before business hours, the blinds still drawn, coffee steaming in paper cups between them. Rachel's eyes widened as Elisa placed the document sealed, signed, and so clearly authentic on her desk. "It's all here," Rachel breathed, fingers moving quickly, reverently. This changes everything." Elisa nodded, voice raw from the night's emotion. "He always protected me, even now." Together they spread out every scrap of evidence. Elisa had gathered photographs of the forged signature recordings of Ethan and Linda's pressure the will with Michael's precise language and the notarized codicil. Rachel's fingers danced over her phone as she called in a favor from a friend at the county records office. Within an hour, a specialist in forensic document analysis, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes to match, sat at the conference table reviewing the signatures side by side. She examined the curves and pressure, the unnatural hesitation in the forged N, the subtle tremor Michael's wife would never make. She laid the two signatures beside each other with finality. "This is a forgery, no question. And the original will, this is ironclad." Rachel's voice grew strong. "With this, we don't just stop the sale. We prove fraud, intent, and manipulation. Ethan and Linda won't know what hit them." Elisa felt tears sting her eyes, but this time she did not look away. There was power in the truth, power in knowing she was no longer alone. She sent Thomas Miller a short message. "It's real. We have it all." He answered in moments, "Watch your back. If they're desperate, they'll get reckless." Back on Willow Lane, the energy in the house had changed. Ethan and Linda sensed the shift, their urgency, sharper eyes wild as they realized the sands were slipping from beneath their feet. Linda hissed on the phone with some faceless advisor, her words clipped and panicked. Ethan slammed doors, retreated to the office, hands shaking as he printed out medical research. The new tactic surfaced that afternoon. Linda appeared in the kitchen, tone syrupy sweet. "Elisa, I've been worried about you. All this stress, all these accusations. It's not good for your health. You've seemed confused lately, haven't you?" Her smile was razor thin. Ethan joined, softer, but no less sinister. "Mom, we're just trying to help. If something's wrong, we can get you checked out. Maybe talk to someone. You know, for your own good." Elisa felt the floor tilt, anger and disbelief flaring hot in her chest. They would call her crazy, brand her incompetent, just to steal what they hadn't earned. For a flash, she wondered how many other families had crumbled beneath this kind of greed. But this time she did not shrink. She looked Linda dead in the eye. "You don't have to worry about my mind, Linda. I remember everything I need to." Rachel's car pulled up outside parking with deliberate visibility at the curb. A moment later, Thomas Miller crossed the lawn, broad shoulders, straight badge from his detective days, glinting in his hand, not official anymore, but a reminder of who he'd been. He nodded to Rachel, then to Elisa, and together they stepped inside. Rachel's tone was icy calm. "I'd like a word, Ethan." "Linda, in private, if you please." She produced a thick envelope, tapping it against her palm. "This is a copy of Michael Nguyen's original will and testament, as well as evidence of attempted fraud and forgery. You will cease all pressure on Mrs. Nguyen immediately. If you contact her doctor, Adult Protective Services, or make another move to suggest mental incapacity, we will press criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud." Ethan's mouth opened-closed, his face whitening as Rachel laid out every fact, every law, every consequence. Linda's hands shook, rage and fear battling in her eyes. Thomas stood by the doorway, arms folded, gaze hard. "If you try to intimidate her again, you'll answer to me too. And if you think no one's watching, you're wrong. This whole neighborhood is." For a long moment the house pulsed with silent electricity, anger, fear, defiance hanging thick as thunderclouds. Ethan tried once to bluster, "You can't do this, she's not well, you'll see she—" Rachel cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. "The only ones who aren't well here are the people who tried to steal from their own family. Pack your things, leave this house. Any further contact will go through my office. You're done." They watched, hearts pounding, as Ethan and Linda retreated upstairs, doors slamming in defeat. Elisa stood, hands trembling, but head high, every muscle in her body tense with adrenaline and relief. She glanced at Thomas, at Rachel, at the open garden through the window, and saw not just her own salvation, but the hope that no one would ever make her feel powerless again. Outside, the rain finally broke sunlight, cutting through the clouds in brilliant shafts. The danger wasn't over, not yet. But the worst, Elisa thought, might finally be behind her. She pressed Michael's will to her heart, feeling the steady thrum of her own strength reborn unbroken, and at last believed. The morning broke with a storm still in the air. The sky over Willow Lane seething with bruised clouds, wind rattling the old glass. Elisa dressed carefully, choosing Michael's favorite blue cardigan, a soft, steady armor. Today, there would be no more hiding. The night before, Rachel had called with a plan. No more secrets, no more whispers. Today, everything would be brought into the open. At 9 sharp, a knock thundered at the front door. Elisa felt the muscles in her neck tighten as she opened it to find 2 men in ill-fitting suits, badges pinned haphazardly to their lapels. Their faces were blank, their smiles oily. "Mrs. Nguyen, we're here on behalf of the county. I'm afraid you'll need to vacate the premises immediately. There's been a report and issue of your mental competency, ma'am. For your own safety, we're required to escort you out." For a moment the world swam. The men's voices were practiced, the words rehearsed. But something was wrong, too slick, too hurried. She glanced over their shoulders and caught sight of Linda's car idling at the curb, Ethan pacing nervously on the sidewalk, face half hidden by a phone call. Elisa met the men's gaze and didn't blink. "May I see your official paperwork?" The judge's order. They hesitated. The taller one coughed. "We have authorization. We just need you to come with us, ma'am." Behind the curtains, Thomas Miller was ready. He'd been watching since dawn, his camera trained on the porch. Now he slipped out the side door, circling quietly through the garden, his phone set to record. A seasoned cop's instinct guided him every angle, every word. "I don't believe you're who you say you are," Elisa said, her voice clear, slicing the silence. "You're not from the county. You're trespassing. Leave my property now or I'll call the real authorities." The men exchanged a nervous glance, but before they could answer, Rachel Lane appeared at the gate, legal folder in hand, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Gentlemen, I'm attorney Rachel Lane. By order of the court, all actions concerning this property are suspended until further review. I advise you to leave immediately. Further intimidation of my client will be documented and prosecuted." Thomas, phone in hand, stepped up beside Elisa, nodding once. The men hesitated, then turned their retreat as rapid as their arrival. Ethan and Linda charged up the walk, faces white with fury and fear. "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" Ethan shouted, his composure gone. "You're sick. You need help. We're trying to save you from yourself." Linda's voice rose shrill and frantic. "Why are you letting outsiders turn you against your own family?" Elisa stood her ground, hands trembling but face unbowed. "What I need is to be protected from you. I know what you've done, and now so does everyone else." Rachel's phone buzzed. She answered, nodding, then turned to the family. "I've called the county sheriff and a social worker. Everything today will be documented legally and publicly." Within the hour, the living room was crowded. Ethan and Linda flanked by their attorney, Thomas, with his camera and notebook. Rachel calm and collected, and at Elisa's invitation, half a dozen family members, cousins, aunts, even Mia clutching her phone, watching from the stairs with wide, frightened eyes. This was no longer just a private war. It was an intervention, a reckoning. Rachel began, her voice steady. "We're here today to clarify ownership of the Willow Lane estate and the circumstances under which Mrs. Nguyen has been pressured and defrauded." Linda broke first. "This is insane. You can't prove anything." Thomas pressed play on his phone. The room filled with the recorded voices of the imposters at the door, their threats and evasions captured with perfect clarity. Next came the clips of Ethan and Linda coaching, cajoling, and finally threatening Elisa, proof of their conspiracy laid bare before friends and family. Rachel produced the will, notarized, the original signature clear, the garden clause unmistakable. She laid out the forensic report, Elisa's signature, the forgeries, the attempt to subvert Michael's final wish. Each page was passed around, met with shock, then anger, then disgust. Cousins shook their heads. Aunts wept. Mia turned away, tears sliding down her cheeks. Ethan tried to recover, voice desperate. "Mom, we were just scared. You've been forgetful and the house is so much for you." Elisa's reply was ice. "You were scared of losing what you never earned. You forged my name. You hired strangers to threaten me. You tried to steal my life's work." Linda began to sob, clutching Ethan's arm. "We thought we could fix it, make it right." Rachel's final blow was swift and surgical. "As of now, you are ordered to cease all contact with Mrs. Nguyen unless through counsel. This case will be forwarded to the DA's office for fraud and elder abuse investigation. If you return here, you will be removed by law enforcement." There was nothing left to say. Ethan slumped in his chair, face in his hands. Linda's sobs broke the silence. The family sat in stunned witness, the room suddenly echoing with the truth that had been hidden too long. Outside, the wind cleared the last of the storm blowing over Willow Lane. For Elisa, there was grief and pain, and finally vindication. She had stood her ground, she had named her betrayal, and now at last she was seen. As the house emptied, Elisa stood in the entryway, Rachel and Thomas beside her, Mia hovering uncertainly at the foot of the stairs. "We're here," Rachel murmured, touching Elisa's hand. "You did it." Elisa nodded, exhaustion washing over her. But beneath it all, steady, indestructible, was hope. She had survived the fire, and now in the wreckage she would begin again. The days that followed the confrontation blurred together, each morning rising with a flood of phone calls, emails, knocks at the door. The family left Willow Lane under a low gray sky, Ethan and Linda avoiding all eyes, suitcases thumping down the steps. The neighborhood watched, not with curiosity, but with something heavier, outrage, sadness, the kind of quiet fury that lingers in close-knit communities when the unthinkable happens. Within 24 hours, the story spread, a trickle first, then a wave. At the grocery store, at church, outside the library, people stopped Elisa, offering casseroles and hugs, words of comfort and gasps of disbelief. "You don't deserve this," Mrs. Chavez said, gripping her hand in the produce aisle. "If you need anything at all, you call me." The bank teller pressed a note into her palm. "We stand with you." Even the mayor's office sent a letter offering solidarity and support for your courage in the face of betrayal. News of the forged documents, the threats, the attempted fraud ignited a local fury. The town's Facebook groups burned with comments condemning Ethan and Linda, rallying behind Elisa, calling for justice. "What kind of children turn on their own mother?" someone wrote. That house was a landmark, so was her heart. The outrage was public, fierce, and for Elisa, a strange comfort. For days, Mia lingered at the edge of the garden backpack, dangling eyes red. She wouldn't go near her parents, who sat on the porch, heads bowed, waiting for the sheriff's summons. One afternoon, Mia found Elisa trimming roses, the old tin box of letters at her side. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't know. I thought you were just being stubborn." Her voice broke. "I should have helped you. I'm sorry I didn't see." Elisa knelt, gathering Mia into her arms, her own tears flowing. "You are not to blame," she murmured. "You are my hope. Don't let this make you hard. Let it teach you to fight for what matters, for kindness, always for kindness." Inside, Ethan and Linda sat at the dining table, shoulders hunched, faces drawn. Their pride and anger had burned away, leaving only exhaustion and a kind of stunned regret. They apologized at first defensively, then as the reality set in with a hollow ache. "Mom, I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted. "I lost myself. I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. We're so sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." Linda sobbed quietly, unable to look Elisa in the eye. "We were scared we made terrible mistakes. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." Elisa listened. She heard the pain, the fear, the guilt. She did not absolve them. Some wounds must be lived with, but she didn't turn away. "We will live with what's been done," she said. "But I will not let bitterness take root. You must find your own way to heal. I will find mine." That night, Elisa sat in the garden reading Michael's letters, the air alive with the hum of crickets and distant laughter from the neighbors' yards. She realized that for the first time since the ordeal began, she could breathe freely. The pain was there, sharp, sometimes overwhelming, but beneath it was something else: relief, a fragile sense of peace. Community poured into her life in unexpected ways. Old friends from her teaching days arrived with flowers and stories, reminding her of 1,000 small kindnesses she'd once given and now received in return. Children she'd taught years before sent her letters, describing how her courage inspired them to face their own fears. One evening, Pastor Warren visited, sitting quietly with Elisa on the porch, listening to the quiet murmur of the garden. "You've been wronged," he said gently, "but you've also been seen, Elisa. People are watching what you do next." She nodded, understanding. "I've been given more than I can keep for myself. I can't go back, not to how things were, but maybe I can make something new from the ashes." A week after the storm, Elisa called Rachel and asked her to begin the process of selling Willow Lane. The house, with all its memories, was too large, too full of ghosts. She would not let it become a battleground or a shrine. At the bank, she set up a fund for local children's scholarships and for single mothers in crisis, her gift back to a town that had given her so much. She met with the director of the community center, offering to sponsor after-school reading programs and summer camps, planting seeds of hope where there had been only pain. Packing the house was an act of gentle grief and deliberate healing. Elisa kept Michael's letters, family photos, a handful of keepsakes, and left the rest for the new owners, a note tucked inside a kitchen drawer. "Tend this place well. It was built on love and survived betrayal. May it bring you peace." The sale was swift. Neighbors, moved by her courage, spread the word to the right buyer, a young family with small children who promised to care for the garden and let it bloom anew. The day she handed over the keys, Elisa stood in the empty living room, sunlight striping the bare floor, and felt only gratitude. Her new apartment was modest, filled with light, with just enough room for her books, her memories, and her freedom. Each morning she woke early, laced up her walking shoes, and set out through the neighborhood, waving to friends, new and old. Her calendar filled with volunteer work, teaching reading to children who needed the kind of hope she now knew by heart. The town kept watch, a quiet line of support no longer out of pity, but admiration. At the community center's grand reopening, Elisa was invited to cut the ribbon, the applause lingering in the evening air like a blessing. She was no longer just a woman who had survived betrayal. She was a builder, a healer, a force for good. Her wounds did not vanish, but they no longer defined her. In their place grew something wilder and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. And when Mia came to visit carrying her own notebook full of stories and questions, Elisa welcomed her in, knowing that even out of heartbreak, love could begin again. Elisa's new house was nothing like Willow Lane, and that was its gift. It stood quietly on a sunlit corner 2 blocks from the elementary school white clapboard with blue shutters and a crooked picket fence tangled in honeysuckle. The yard was small, but bursting with life, her own hands coaxing tomatoes and daffodils from the tired soil, a bird feeder swaying gently in the morning breeze. The space fit her like a favorite coat, unpretentious, hopeful, already full of possibility. On her first morning, Elisa stood at the kitchen window with a mug of tea, watching the sunrise melt away the night. She let the quiet fill her, a kind of healing she'd almost forgotten. She was no longer waiting for the phone to ring, for bad news, for old ghosts to rattle the floorboards. The past lived in her, but it did not chain her. Each breath was a gentle claim on the future. The idea came easily. Maybe it had always been growing there in the silence beneath all those hard years. A few phone calls to the school principal, a gentle conversation with Pastor Warren, a post on the town's bulletin board, free tutoring, all ages welcome. Mrs. Nguyen, retired teacher, available afternoons and weekends. Snacks provided, no charge. At first, only 2 children appeared, siblings in hand-me-down coats, faces solemn, but eyes shining with hope. Elisa welcomed them in, settling them at the kitchen table with notebooks and pencils, slicing apples, pouring milk. She listened to them read haltingly, gently guiding their words, praising every victory. She found herself smiling, a deep, unforced joy she hadn't felt in years. Word spread. By the end of the first week, 4 more children showed up, one a neighbor's son struggling with math, another a shy girl who barely spoke above a whisper. Elisa made space, rearranged the furniture, bought extra chairs. She found herself looking forward to the rush of small feet on her porch, the cheerful chaos of questions and laughter. Lan stopped by with a tin of cookies and a stack of gently used books. "You're building something special, Elisa," she said, her eyes kind and proud. "Let me know if you ever need help with the legal side or just someone to read to the littlest ones." Thomas Miller became a fixture as well. His police instincts now turned to gentle protection, walking the kids home after dark, fixing the squeaky fence, patching up scraped knees and broken bike chains. His gruff presence, which had once intimidated, now soothed. He listened more than he spoke, always ready with a quiet word or a reassuring smile. The house transformed. Art projects filled the fridge. Laughter drifted through the open windows. Sometimes in the soft hour before dusk, Elisa would look around and realize she was surrounded not by her own children, not by ghosts, but by a new kind of family, one knit together by resilience and hope. The stories multiplied. One boy, once known as the troublemaker, surprised everyone by writing a poem that moved the whole class to tears. A quiet girl who had never raised her hand before finally stood to read aloud, her voice trembling, then strong. A single mother, too shy to ask for help, found comfort in Elisa's kitchen, watching her son learn to read with pride blooming on her face. The class grew 10, then 12, then 15 children. The living room filled with the music of possibility. Old students returned to volunteer. Neighbors dropped off bags of groceries, paint for the porch, seed packets for the garden. The town that had once gathered in anger and pity now gathered in celebration, cheering Elisa on as she rebuilt not just her life, but a circle of hope for everyone. Through it all, Elisa felt herself healing, not in sudden revelation, but in small, steady increments. Each time a child conquered a new word. Each time a parent smiled in relief. She felt the ache of the past lessen the old wound, scarring over with something bright and lasting. She was not the victim of family betrayal here. She was simply Mrs. Nguyen, teacher, mentor, neighbor, friend. She saw Mia often, her granddaughter now a regular visitor, sometimes tutoring, sometimes just sitting quietly at Elisa's side writing stories in a battered notebook. Their bond grew forged in honesty and forgiveness, the pain of the past, a shared history, not a curse. In the evenings, Elisa sometimes sat on her porch with Lan and Thomas, watching the children chase fireflies in the fading light. They would talk of the old days of loss, of how easily one life can touch another and send out ripples far beyond its reach. There was pain in their stories, but always hope too. The lesson was simple, Elisa realized, but not easy. To survive is not enough. To heal, we must give. To move forward, we must reach back and lift others with us. She never regretted selling the house, not once. What she built now was more lasting than bricks or deeds, a circle of young lives changed forever by patience and love. One quiet night, as the town settled and the stars shimmered over her small blue house, Elisa stood at the window, hands clasped in gratitude. She had lost much, but she had found something greater. She had found the peace that comes from purpose, and the kind of happiness that grows wild wherever you tend it. And with each sunrise, as children streamed to her door with backpacks and laughter, Elisa Nguyen knew her story was not one of endings, but of new beginnings of love passed forward and multiplied. Summer settled softly on the town, the gardens bursting into their wildest green, as if the whole world was offering up forgiveness in blooms and birdsong. Life at Elisa's little house found its rhythm, the scratch of chalk on the kitchen chalkboard, children's laughter spilling through open windows, the hum of the community growing closer day by day. It was on a golden Saturday, a year after everything had changed, that the knock came at the door. Mia, now tall and self-assured, glanced up from her storybook, reading the flicker of nerves in her grandmother's eyes. Elisa opened the door to find Ethan and Linda standing on the stoop, older, tired, their faces etched with regret and longing. They held hands, a silent plea shining between them. Ethan spoke first, his voice unsteady, the weight of too many unspoken words pressing down. "Mom, we're sorry. Not just for what we did, but for every time we made you feel small, unwanted, powerless. We lost ourselves. I wish we could take it back, but we can't. All we can do is ask for your forgiveness and hope. Hope you'll let us start over." Linda blinked away, tears, nodding. "You taught us what family means. I know we failed you. We want to make it right. Please, can we come home?" Elisa stood silent for a moment, searching their faces for truth. The old wounds flared, but so did something warmer, memories of simpler days. Michael's voice in the garden, Mia's hand in hers, laughter at the kitchen table. She stepped forward, took both their hands in hers. "I can't pretend nothing happened," she said, voice strong, unwavering. "But forgiveness is a gift we give to ourselves, too. I won't let the past chain me or you. The garden survives because we tend it even after storms, and so must we." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "We'll help however we can. Just tell us where to begin." "Start here," Elisa said, guiding them through the gate toward the garden. "There's always work to be done, roses to prune, seeds to sow, weeds to pull. That's how we heal, together." As the afternoon unfolded, the old traditions bloomed anew. Mia led a circle of children in a game of spelling and storytelling beneath the apple tree, echoing the games Elisa once played with Ethan. Linda and Ethan joined in laughter, awkward at first, then growing true and bright, mixing with the breeze and the scent of fresh earth. Later, as the sun dipped low and golden over the riot of flowers, 3 generations gathered in the garden, the past and future entwined in their hands. Mia, her face radiant, pulled out a lesson plan she'd made herself. "Grandma, can I teach today?" she asked. Elisa smiled, pride and hope lighting her from within. "It's yours now," she said gently. "You carry the best of us forward." The family worked side by side, Ethan repairing a broken trellis, Linda planting new marigolds, Mia teaching a group of little ones to read their first words. The garden, once a place of sorrow and loss, thrummed with life, forgiveness, and possibility. Even Thomas and Lon stopped by, bringing lemonade and warm bread, their presence a reminder that true family is chosen as much as born. They watched as the lines of pain faded into laughter, as the scars of betrayal became the roots of something lasting. As evening fell, fireflies blinked over the garden, and the air filled with the sound of children's voices singing, shouting, reading stories aloud. Elisa sat on her old bench beneath the apple tree, hands folded, watching it all. She felt the weight of the years, but it was no longer a burden. It was a blessing, a testament to survival, to healing, to the beauty that comes when love is chosen again and again. Mia sat beside her, laying her head on Elisa's shoulder. "I want to keep teaching Grandma, like you." "You will," Elisa replied, her voice soft as the dusk. "You already are."